Hello everyone. This presentation is entitled What is New Immigrant Literature? It's concerned with discussing the nature of the concept of new immigrant literature and how far this term new is related to the main frame of immigrant literature in general. So what is the meaning of new immigrant literature? New immigrant literature is that literature produced in the last 30 years of the new global era, marked by fluidity and border crossing by immigrant writers writing in English or French. Those writers writing in English are called Anglophone writers, while those writing in French are called Francophone writers. We can classify new immigrant literature as a subgenre of post-colonial literature, problematizing migrancy by deconstructing the binarism of home and the world and linking the global to the post-colonial. So, what is the meaning of the binarism of home and the world? It is that sort of contradiction existing between the home country in which the writer was born and the world. It's referring here to the hosting country to which the writer moves. So this contradiction or binarism can be deconstructed by trying to find out the common grounds of intimacy and connection between both. And what is the meaning of the global and the post-colonial? Here, the global refers to the migrant experience in general, and the post-colonial is that sort of attachment between the writer and his home country. So, this type of new immigrant literature offers textual models of hybridization and dialogic exchange as well as resistance and liberation. So hybridization and dialogic exchange are concerned with deconstructing the binarism of home and the world. And the idea of resistance and liberation is related to the post-colonial nature of that type of literature. The question in this slide is why using the term new along with immigrant literature? Because the first reason, immigrant literature was traditionally classified according to national, regional, geographic, or lingual categories, such as African, South Asian, Middle Eastern, Arab American, etc., rather than global or post-colonial categories. So in these categories, we have this stress on the geographic and regional location, rather than the post-colonial or global nature of the literature under study. The second reason is that new immigrant literature is completely different from old immigrant literature and home literature. For example, we have, as an example of old immigrant literature, Al-Mahjar school, or the Arab American literature that was produced at the turn of the 20th century by Lebanese and Syrian writers such as Khalil Mutran and Khalil Gibran. In such movement of immigrant literature, we don't have that theme of identity crisis as essential to the movement. But in the new immigrant literature movement, we have identity crisis as essential to the movement because of the historical junctures that have taken place in the last 30 years. The third reason why using the term new, because this immigrant literature is based on negotiation, hybridization, and syncretization on all levels, both linguistic and cultural, as characteristic of new immigrant literature. So this is completely different from home literature, which is based on a particular commitment to tradition and the national legacy of the literature under study. So what is the difference here in this slide between immigrant literature, post-migratory literature, and diasporic literature? Now, we have something in common before discussing the differences. They all share the categories of exile and migrancy. And again, we can say that both post-migratory and immigrant literature terms are similar as far as they are associated with regeneration of new communities and identities out of heterogeneous experiences in the hosting country. But still we have a main difference between diasporic literature and post-migratory or immigrant literature. Diasporic literature indicates the sense of diaspora, which is based on a negative connotation of loss, trauma, exile, and suffering. Now, the question in this slide is, who are immigrant writers? They are border intellectuals, equipped with first-hand knowledge of both cultures, the culture of origin and that of the adoptive country. They are immigrant writers assuming the role of mediators, interpreters, or cultural translators. So what is the meaning of cultural translators? They are writers concerned with communicating their native experience to the whole world. We have here three different examples. We have South Asian writers such as Kamila Shamsi and Mohsen Hamid. We have Caribbean writers such as Wilson Harris and V.S. Naipaul. We have African writers such as Ahdaf Suwaif and Leila Abbouda. Now here you have Leila Abbouda as an immigrant writer. So in one of her autobiographical articles entitled Moving Away from Accuracy, Abbouda writes about her experience of relocation and immigration. Where are you from? This is a popular question in Britain, where identity has come to matter more than what we achieve or whether we are kind or disloyal. I say, I am Sudanese, but my mother is Egyptian. I lived in Khartoum, but every year we spend the summer months in Cairo. I met my husband when I was 13. We are now living in Aberdeen. So her experience of geography and space is so enormous and so rich. She moves all the time from one place to another and from one space to another. This is the general experience of immigrant writers in general. So what are the themes of new immigrant literature? The first important theme is that of cultural mobility and relocation, which indicates a high sense of cultural and geographic dynamism. In this picture, you have a focus on the main terms of immigrant experience in general. They are all located in one trend of thinking, that is of cultural mobility. You have a reference to asylum, migrants, refugee, and emergency. Another theme is that of bilingualism. So the double use of two languages in one text is a main theme of immigrant writing. You have that sense of biculturalism. So the culture of the pre-colonial era and the culture and language of the post-colonial era. So this is a double writing. An example of that is Arab British writers writing in English and using Arabic expressions and proverbs. Another important theme is that of gendered subjectivity. So immigrant women writers, for example, write back to a long history of stereotyping of third world women as submissive victims. That's why they try to infuse their cultural backgrounds and traditions with the discourses of Western modernity. And that's why we have that sense of female empowerment discourse, in which women are represented as strong, resilient, and exuberant. So what are the new immigrant literature techniques and strategies? First of all, we have this technique of translation. Here you have this interest in linguistic translation. And here I'm using the term hybridizing translation to indicate the use of both strategies, which are foreignization and domestication. Foreignization is when the writer uses foreign terms as they are, in his foreign text. And domestication is when the writer uses terms that are translated into the target text and language to domesticate the use of the language and text in general. So here you have an example of both strategies used in one paragraph and text. Here the text is Cairo, Memoir of a City Transformed, written by Ahdaf Swaif in 2012. In one of the most moving moments of the revolution, here she is describing a scene from the revolution. And there were to be many, the people's delegations that had come in from the cities and the provinces of Egypt, set up their banners around the garden and set up the chant, Ash-Shar'iyya min at-Tahrir, legitimacy comes from Tahrir. So here you have a foreignizing strategy, Ash-Shar'iyya min at-Tahrir. It's a foreign expression that cannot be understood by foreign readers. And then comes the domestication strategy of translating the foreign terms into the target language, as legitimacy comes from Tahrir. So using both strategies is essential to new immigrant literature. The other technique is cultural translation. Cultural translation is different from linguistic translation. Here the writer is interested in translating the traditions and legacies of his own culture. Concepts, occasions, culture-specific items, such as Arab cultural items, and norms of wedding, rituals, religious occasions, and so on. So, for example, here you have Swaif, writing about small Eid and big Eid instead of Eid al-Fitr, or Bayram and festival or Eid. So here, this is a representation of a culture-specific concept and occasion intrinsic to Muslim culture and Arab culture in relation to the end of the month of Ramadan and cake making and to sheep new clothes and fireworks, respectively. Another strategy is that of intertextuality. Now, the use of hybrid texts or references to different types of texts in the same text is a kind of a strategy used by immigrant writers to connect to two worlds, that seem so different. For example, in Swaif's 1964, which is a short story, Aisha's hybridity is manifested in her intellectual oscillation between the Arab folk tales of Clever Hassan, Shatter Hassan, and Arabian Nights, Alf Leila wa Leila, on the one hand, and the Western tales of Little Red Riding Hood, Little Grey Rabbit, Noddy, Hans Christian Andersen, Beckford's Vathek, and Count Dracula on the other hand. Thanks a lot for listening to this presentation.